Welcome back to the Deep Dive, Congress in Context. We are jumping straight into Washington, D.C. on Friday, October 3rd, 2025. A critical moment.
Critical is right, day 3 of a government shutdown.
And our mission today, really, is to cut through the noise, move past the headlines. We want you to understand the legislative action, the political maneuvering, and maybe the hidden gears still turning despite the funding lapse.
Well, the first thing to note is the contrast in urgency. The House met, yes, briefly, at 3:30 p.m.
Briefly.
Very. Their main act was adjourning until Monday, October 6th, and then they designated October 7th through the 13th as a, quote, district work period.
The district work period during a shutdown. Okay, that says a lot about the House's immediate priorities, doesn't it?
It certainly lowers the temperature from their end. So the real focus, the actual legislative battleground, was the Senate floor. That's where the deadlock was playing out.
Okay, so let's dig into that. You mentioned key votes in the Senate.
Yeah.
This is where the funding fight really crystallized, right?
Exactly. 2 crucial votes on continuing resolutions, or CRs. And neither one could get the 60 votes needed to break a filibuster for cloture.
So tell us about the first proposal. What was on the table?
First up was S-2882. This was the Democrats' approach, a longer-term measure. It aimed to fund the government for the entire next fiscal year through September 30th, 2026.
A full year fix. How did that go?
It failed. The vote to move forward was 46 yeas to 52 nays. Didn't get close to the 60 needed.
Okay, so the comprehensive Democratic plan goes down. What was the alternative they voted on?
That was H.R. 5371. This was the Republican proposal already passed by the House, a very different beast.
So.
This was pitched as a clean, short-term CR, just funding to reopen the government until November 21st. Basically, kick the can down the road a bit, allow more negotiation time.
And then the vote on that one. Still needed 60.
Still needed 60 and didn't get it. It got more support, 54 yeas to 44 nays, but still fell short.
So the big takeaway here seems to be complete entrenchment. The House GOP's clean option failed, but so did the Senate Democrats' long-term plan. Neither side would let the other claim even a temporary win.
Precisely. It tells you the fight isn't just about funding levels anymore. It's about the policy demands tied to that funding, which naturally raises the question.
What are those demands? What's fueling this? Because the rhetoric on the floor sounded, well, intense, like financial warfare almost.
It really did. Both sides came out swinging with some huge numbers and accusations. Let's start with the Republican narrative.
Okay, what was their main line of argument?
They accused Democrats of holding the government hostage. Their key phrase was $1.5 trillion in partisan spending demands. They claimed this was the price Democrats were demanding to reopen things.
A $1.5 trillion wish list. Did they get specific about what was in it?
They did. They pointed to things like funding health care for undocumented immigrants, extending those pandemic-era health insurance subsidies, and they specifically called out a Democratic demand, they claimed, to repeal a $50 billion rural hospital stabilization fund that had been in a previous big spending bill.
And they tried to contrast this with past votes, too, didn't they?
Yes. Strategically, they noted Democrats had voted for similar clean, short-term CRs 13 times under the current administration. The implication being, why not now? What's changed?
All right, so that's the Republican frame. What about the Democrats? How did they characterize the shutdown and the stalemate?
Their narrative was equally charged, maybe even more focused. They labeled it the Trump shutdown and framed it primarily as a healthcare crisis.
Healthcare how? What was their central point?
It all centered on the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, specifically premium tax credits. Republicans were refusing to extend them, Democrats said.
And the impact of that refusal?
Democrats put a number on it. They claimed premiums would more than double, specifically a 114% increase for 24 million Americans if those credits expired. That was their core accusation. Republicans were prioritizing this cut over families' health care costs.
And they contrasted it with other Republican actions.
They did. They brought up tax cuts for corporations and CEOs passed earlier in the year, arguing Republicans moved fast on those but were now stalling on health care for millions.
So you have these huge competing narratives about trillions in spending versus massive health care hikes. But sometimes the smaller, specific issues caught in the middle are just as revealing.
Absolutely. And we saw a perfect example of that from Senator Grassley. He took to the floor to talk about something completely different, farming.
What was his angle?
He highlighted the really dire situation for corn farmers facing the worst corn-to-fertilizer ratios in American history, he said. His push. Congress needs to legislate permanent, year-round, nationwide E15 ethanol use.
E15 ethanol. Why now? Why tie that to the shutdown debate?
His argument was about economic certainty and stimulus. He claimed E15 would add nearly $26 billion to the economy, boost corn demand significantly, and potentially save taxpayers billions. It shows how these specific industry pressures don't just disappear during a funding fight, they become leverage points.
It's a fascinating dynamic. While the top-level funding fight dominates headlines, you're saying other parts of the government are still functioning, or at least trying to.
That's a really crucial point for you, the listener, to grasp. The political theater is intense, yes, but the actual machinery of government, especially the regulatory side, doesn't just grind to a halt entirely.
So what was happening beneath the surface on Friday?
We saw a lot of activity in terms of executive communications, basically federal agencies submitting final rules and guidance to Congress. This stuff keeps moving.
Give us some examples. What kind of regulations are we talking about?
Okay, in healthcare and safety, the FDA submitted a major final rule on how laboratory-developed tests are regulated. These are those complex medical tests developed in-house by labs. That's a big deal for diagnostics.
Right, that sounds pretty fundamental.
And also from the FDA, a final rule on prior notice requirements for food coming in through international mail. Think safety inspections. Plus, the EPA submitted a whole batch of air plan approvals for states like Delaware, New York, West Virginia, Washington, California, managing air quality standards.
So environmental regulations, food safety, medical test rules, and what about the financial side? Any movement there?
Definitely. The IRS was busy. They submitted interim guidance on the corporate alternative minimum tax, that's Notice 2025-28, impacting major corporations, and also major final regulations on catch-up contributions for retirement accounts, EC 2104.
These are complex, impactful rules affecting businesses and individuals, still being finalized and sent over even with the shutdown drama.
Exactly. The regulatory state keeps churning. And it wasn't just the agencies. Congressional committees were also still working, reporting out legislation.
So committees were still advancing bills. What kinds of topics?
A real mix. The Judiciary Committee reported out several firearm-related bills. H.R. 2267 about demographic data on prohibited purchasers. H.R. 38 on concealed carry reciprocity. H.R. 2184 dealing with the NICS background check correction timelines.
Okay, gun policy moving. What else?
Ways and Means reported out bills on Social Security number protection for kids, H.R. 5348, and improving IRS services via judicial review, H.R. 5349.
And I saw some health and environmental bills, too.
Yep. Bills reauthorizing rural health programs, H.R. 2493, and the Healthy Start Initiative, H.R. 3302. And then pretty significantly, 2 bills directing the removal of grizzly bears and gray wolves in certain areas from the endangered species list, H.R. 281 and H.R. 845.
That's quite a range. From Social Security to endangered species to gun laws, all technically advancing while the government is supposedly shut down over funding.
It shows the different tracks Congress operates on, but let's look back at the Senate floor process itself, because the use of unanimous consent requests really highlighted the breakdown.
Yes, UC requests, where just one senator can halt something everyone else agrees on. How did that play out on Friday?
It became a tool for direct confrontation. First example, cybersecurity. Senator Peters tried to get unanimous consent for S. 1337.
What's that bill?
A clean, bipartisan 10-year extension for really vital cybersecurity authorities, stuff that protects hospitals, the power grid, things that had actually expired.
Sounds pretty important and non-controversial usually.
You'd think. But Senator Paul objected immediately, his reasoning. The shutdown crisis meant no unrelated legislation should pass, period. Blocking a bipartisan national security bill over the funding fight that shows you how deep the dysfunction goes.
Wow. And there's another UC fight over police funding. That sounded a bit different.
It was. Senator Schmidt tried to pass a package of bipartisan bills supporting law enforcement, things related to Police Week. Senator Booker objected.
But not because he opposed the bills themselves.
Correct. His objection was aimed squarely at the administration's policy of withholding certain Justice Department grants from jurisdictions they label as sanctuary cities.
So he wasn't fighting the law. He was using the UC process to fight the executive branch's implementation of grant rules.
Exactly. It's leverage. Fighting over how grant money is used as a political tool by the administration, using a completely separate set of bills as the battleground. It shows that absolutely nothing is off limits for linkage politics right now.
Okay, so looking ahead, the Senate adjourned, but they're coming back Monday, October 6th. What's on the immediate agenda?
More high-stakes votes. At 5:30 p.m. Monday, they're scheduled to vote on cloture again for H.R. 5371, that short-term House-passed Republican CR.
Trying again on the short-term fix, maybe hoping the weekend changed some minds.
That seems to be the play. See if the pressure back home had any effect. And then right after those funding votes, win or lose,
What happens?
they move to nominations. A massive en bloc list of nominees authorized under S.Res. 412. They'll vote on cloture for the whole package.
In block. So a big batch all at once. Any
Yeah.
notable names in there?
Oh, yes. Includes diplomats, like Herschel Walker, nominated for ambassador to the Bahamas, and critical Justice Department roles, like Stanley Woodward Jr., nominated for Associate Attorney General. His nomination's drawn fire because of his past legal clients.
Interesting. So even if they can't agree on funding the government, they're prioritizing moving forward on staffing it, including some controversial picks.
It seems so. The gears of appointments and regulations keep turning, even if the main funding engine has stalled.
So let's try to synthesize this. We've seen the shutdown mechanics, the failed votes, the competing narratives about healthcare versus spending.
Right, and we've seen that underneath that, the regulatory work continues, committee work continues on things from gun control to endangered species. But the core political fight, the thing causing the shutdown, isn't really about the dollar figures in the CRs anymore.
It's about the riders, the policy demands.
Exactly. It's about leveraging the shutdown to force concessions on things like ACA subsidies, or immigration enforcement tied to grants, or maybe even those E15 ethanol rules. It's high-stakes policy leverage using government funding as a weapon.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to chew on. The House, remember, designated next week as a district work period despite the shutdown and these failed votes.
Sending members back home.
Right. So how does that change things? Does facing directly constituents who might be hearing about that potential 114% ACA premium hike,
Right.
or who care about the NICS check delays we mentioned, or maybe run a farm affected by fertilizer costs, does that increase the urgency to find a solution? Or does it just reinforce the divisions?
That's the question. Think about the specific issues we discussed today, the bill numbers, the policy fights. How do those play out not on C-SPAN, but in town halls and local news back in the district? That's where the pressure might build, or where it might just harden. Something to watch as Congress potentially stays home while the government stays closed.